I built this triangular corner shelf 15 or more years ago. It's been in the corner of our kitchen ever since, mostly for plants or for artwork. And we took it down recently because we had to have the kitchen repainted, and I was looking to put it back up, and I decided it was looking a little tired and I wanted something different. In particular, I don't want the back anymore. I just want some floating shelves to go in the corner, so that's what I'm building today. Now they're just triangular shelves. I don't really need a fancy plan, but I still went into SketchUp, mostly so I could show my wife what I was thinking about, but still just to get the dimensions hammered out, and then I could put together a little printout that has all the dimensions noted that I wanted to work on. And I've got this piece of 8-foot walnut that should give me plenty of wood. I only need 3. We need 3 shelves, and the shelves are going to be about 14 inches on a side, so across the front it's going to be about 20 inches. Now for maximum strength, I want the grain to run along the shelf, so you're going to, well, the shelves are going to be sort of oriented like that. I mean, this is only 6 inches. I'm going to need to glue the board wider, but so you're going to have a triangular shelf, and then another triangular shelf, and then another triangular shelf. So it's going to be a little bit of finicky cutting to get what we need. Down at this end of the board, there's some cracks and wormholes and some funky grain, which I think is going to look kind of interesting. So I'm going to try to work from this end. Now, as I mentioned, I need 3 pieces, so I want to nest them together like that. So I'm going to try to measure off what I'm going to need and see how I can, because I'm going to have to glue some more wood on this end to make up the width we need. Let's see, do I want it this way or do I want it this way? Yeah, so this will be the back and this will be the front, right. Okay, so I'm going to glue these 2 boards together, and in this situation I'm having a little bit of issues getting the boards to line up. So I'm going to use dowels to make sure they're perfectly flush on this side. I don't want to cut through any dowels later because I don't want to see them. So I've done a layout as to where the triangles are going to be roughly, and I've put tape down so that I make sure that I don't put any dowels like in this section or this section. And then I put some dowels in and do a test fit and make sure everything lines up. Yeah, nice smooth joint that the dowels guarantee. Now, since the dowels are just being used for alignment, I don't really need to put glue in the holes, but I will anyways, just because I'm a creature of habit. I'll give it about 10 or 15 minutes and then I will scrape off this glue. The next step is going to be to pour some epoxy. So these holes, some of them go right through. So I tape it up on this side and pour the epoxy from the other side. Do not want it seeping out. I'm going to use some West System this time. I think that should be enough. And I have some ebony stain here, and I know I don't have those like those trans tint dye things. I've just dribbled in a little bit of Just a little bit of black stain. Mix well. That goes nice and black. Now one other thing is I'm going to use a heat gun to heat up the wood, because I want the epoxy to run in deep, and you don't want to heat up the epoxy. I've done that before. And yeah, the recommended method I've read from West System is to just heat up the wood, and then the epoxy will run in deeper. So let's do that. Okay. Yeah, it's definitely soaking right through. When I was holding it up earlier, I could see light right through the crack, so it did definitely went all the way through the piece. Okay, let that sit and we'll check back on it tomorrow. So this is the leftover epoxy, and as you can see, I ended up going through 3 batches, because on the bottom, this is the top actually, I had to do a second. I came by several hours later and it had soaked in, and I needed to add more, and then later that evening I turned it over and there were a few spots where there wasn't epoxy, so I ended up having to do some epoxy on the bottom. And so now I'm gonna sand this part down so that it's flat and I can run it through the planer to take it all off. Well, as you can see, I failed epoxy river table school because my epoxy still has a couple of little voids in it, but I'll deal with that later. I'm going to cut these to rough size now, and then I will probably dab on a little 5-minute epoxy to fill those in. And I'm sorry, but my pencil line is not showing up very well on camera because walnut. So I want 20 and about 1/8 along this edge. Wait a minute, no, I can't do that. Shoot. Yeah, so I started laying out for the final shelves, and I haven't actually jointed the edges and made them parallel yet, so I better do that first. So I'll run the one edge over the joiner and then make it parallel on the table saw. Yes, I'm going to cut out this one, finesse it a bit, and then I'm going to use this to trace the other pieces. I got a pretty straight cut on the bandsaw, but I'm going to take it to the sander and make it nice and flat before I use it for tracing out the other pieces that I need. That's pretty good. To be honest, I can see just a little bit of light there, but I happen to know that the corner that I'm fitting this into isn't a perfect 90 either. So that's pretty good. And now I've cut and sanded the other two, so we got our 3 shelves, and yeah, all that careful planning and doweling, and I still managed to cut through a dowel. But now I feel kind of silly because I cut through it, and as I'm sanding, I'm like, this is going to be against the wall. Nobody's ever going to see this. This is the part that people will see. So really, I didn't need to do any of that stuff with the dowels. It's kind of funny. But anyways, next. I wanted to round off the corners. And I made some doodles of circles and things, trying to figure it out in SketchUp. So I got my compact compass and I've been playing with some settings, and I settled on basically I've got this set to 1 5/8 inch diameter. I'm measuring 12 inches from the corner, making a little mark, getting the pin as close to the edge as possible, and then putting my pencil in and drawing an arc, and that looks like it will nicely just sort of come out and then join the face. I'm going to get those marked out on all the others, and then we will get those cut out. On the old unit, the shelf part came to these rather sharp corner, and I wanted to get away with that, and I think this rounded corner, I think it just looks nicer. So this is the top of the shelf, and I want some sort of a cleat under the shelf for supporting it. And this is just some scrap wood that I'm using for imagining, and that looks a bit on the thick side. This might be a bit, actually that might be enough. That's, what's a little 7/8 of an inch. Maybe this. This is just a little bit more than 1.25 inches. I'm thinking maybe that, so that I'll have a shelf support on, whoops, I'll have a shelf support here and then a shelf support there. You know, let's just work on the top of the shelf, and we'll just sort of imagine something like that so that it will be attached to the shelf and then to the wall. But how long? A little bit over 13.5. I don't think I need quite that much. 12. If I do it like 12.5, say, there's just a little overhang there at the end, and I'll probably angle this back. I think that'll look good. So I think I'm going to aim for 12.5. So then on this side it'll be like 11.75 roughly. So I'm going to take the leftover pieces of walnut that I had from the shelf, and I'm going to rip them down to 1.25 inches on the table saw, and then I'll be cutting them to length. So on the shelf supports, I want to have an angled cut on the front. So I've added this piece of plywood to my miter gauge to make it into a 0 clearance piece, and then I can just run the edges right like this. And I've got it for about a 22-25 degree cut there. We're almost getting to the assembly stage. But before I do that, I want to make the shelves a bit thinner. So I experimented a bit, and I want to put a nice chamfer along the bottom edge of the shelf. Use the chamfering bit here in my compact router, and I'll clamp the pieces to the table and get that done. So I got the front angled, but I also now want to angle the length of it. I've got this tapered router bit, and I'd like to run it along the inside face like this along here, so it would slant the inside face of it. Now the challenge I have is these pieces are going to fit together like that. So on these pieces, these short pieces, I could just run this on the router table and I can take those off. But on these pieces, if I run the router bit the entire length of it, then I've got this area where they're not going to connect properly. And I thought about attaching this to the shelf and then just running the whole thing on the router table. I'm a little uncomfortable with that because it's going to be completely hidden and underneath. And so instead, what I'm simply going to do is I'm going to router this until about 1/4 inch from here, and then I'll stop. So on these three, on the longer pieces, I'll run a stopped angled bit. There we go. So here's where we stopped the router bit, and we bring the other piece together, and that goes together really nicely. I snuck up on this a bit when I was on the router table, and very slow and easy, but there is a little bit that's tucked way into the corner that I can chisel out by hand later. Almost done. So here's the shelf, and the grain is running like this. That means when I put these cleats on, That's a cross grain joint. I mean, it's not perfectly perpendicular, but it is certainly not a long grain joint. So I could probably get away with putting glue on it, but I'm not going to. I'm going to use mechanical fasteners. I'm going to screw a couple of screws in through the top, and then I will plug those. Now, I don't know how easy it is to see, but I am going to try and orient the grain to match, but that will be tricky. You can almost see the first coat drying because it goes, the wood is so dry and it just soaks it right in. It is lovely seeing the color just wake up and get rich dark brown, and the different stripes, like here's a bit lighter. And for finish, I use the Minwax water-based oil-modified polyurethane that I like to use. They're going to have plants on them, so they need the protection of polyurethane. I put 3 coats of finish on the body and then 4 coats on the top. And wow, the junky end of the board, wow, did that pop. I'll put up some shots here, some close-ups. I am so glad that I used that end of the board. So as for the wooden plugs, I seem to score about 50%. So about half of them, like this one, are virtually invisible because of the way the grain lines go. Like this one, I managed to somehow, the plug twisted a bit as it went in, so the grain just sort of goes across. It still looks really, really good, but it's not invisible. I also took some screws and I painted them black. I'll be using these for when I mount the shelves, and they'll pretty much disappear. I'm using fairly long screws because I need to get through 3/4 of an inch of wood and 1/2 inch of drywall and then into the stud. And really, I mean, these could probably be done with wall anchors, but and that's one. And so there you go. There's my nice simple set of floating walnut shelves installed in the kitchen. I think they look great, especially the wild green one here. I put that on the bottom for a feature. It's going to be a great addition to the house. And that's about it for this one. As always, I'd like to thank you for stopping by and spending some time in my shop. If you're interested in learning a bit more about the finish that I like to use, I'll put up a link here in the end cards to a video where I go for a deep dive into how I like to brush on that water-based finish. And yeah, and that's it. And we'll see you on the next one. Take care.